Alright, welcome back to the channel. So, first things first, as usual, the episode started with a recap of what happened so far, but I just wanted to get into the title real quick, because it's a little pretentious, and I just gotta say something to that fact. So, the title is An Obol for Charon. Charon being the boatmaster, or the ferryman, on the river Styx, and an obol being an ancient Greek coin. It was also used for weighting. Now, most of us have some passing knowledge of this practice thanks to the continued prevalence of Greek mythology and history. This is one of those little things meant to rope people into thinking, hey, this show is referencing something from antiquity, and I actually got it. That must make me and the other fans really smart.
He is smart.
So, in the original Greek tradition, a single obol was placed in or on the mouth of the deceased to be used as payment to the ferryman, get them across to the other side. Other practices, such as laying coins on the eyes, those came much later in European history. Just as an aside, those who didn't have payment for Charon or whose bodies were left unburied in the world of the living were said to wander the shores of the river for 100 years. Now, the unburied aspect was a central point to the plot of, say, Antigone, which was a play by Sophocles, wherein a woman pleads and schemes against the king to be able to bury her dead brother Polynices so that his spirit will not be so condemned. Anyway, as the episode opens, Pike is in the transporter room to welcome someone over and orders Discount Geordie over there to energize. Now seriously, what is it with the overdone visors in this show? LaForge was the only person we ever saw with one in TNG, and we never saw them at all in TOS. But then I suppose the licensing debacle, which has become more common knowledge, explains all this mishmash. So anyway, as I guessed from thumbnails and conversations and such, we have number one beaming over. For those who don't know, number one was Pike's XO on the Enterprise in the original Star Trek pilot, The Cage. And she was played by the late, great Majel Barrett, who later went on to play Nurse Chapel, Loxana Troy, and lend her dulcet tones to Starfleet computers for decades. So, anyway, she gives him a rundown of the cascading failures on the Enterprise, and Pike muses that there won't be a chief engineer more in love with their ship than Chief Bouvier. Cute little joke, but we know who really gives the Enterprise sugar later on in history. Pike also reiterates his distaste for holographic communications. Now, this is supposed to be an explanation for why they aren't used in the TOS era, at least on the Enterprise, purely because Pike doesn't like them. Now, I really wish they would just stop trying to pretend like they want to sync up with canon, because it's become apparent that, that's not going to happen. So in any case, number one orders a cheeseburger, fries, and habanero sauce. Damn. Then they whisper conspiratorially about her looking into Spock's situation while she's been with the ship in space dock. There's some exposition about Starfleet treating Spock's case as especially serious, number one saying she dug up some more info without sanction, and then Pike replying that as usual they agree, in this case, on not letting Spock get hemmed up without a fight. Now, as usual, when it's Pike just chatting with someone, it's pretty enjoyable. Mount plays the role well, at least with what he's been given, and this seems to actually be a nice interaction between him and a character which, frankly, predated all of this strong female lead uproar by nearly half a century. Rebecca Ramjan seems to do the character some justice, the little bit we get to see of her, but, then again, she's a very capable actress, so there's not really a surprise there. In any case, down in engineering, Stamets and Tilly are hanging out with the Blob, formerly known as May. Tilly still looks weirded out by the thing, while Stamets is geeking out over how sophisticated a blob it really is, and wondering if they should name it. Now, there's some with Tilly thinking back on the real May and how she tried to reach out to Tilly despite her being a weird kid in school. Then there's a jump scare when the blob slips a hand up onto the glass where Tilly's is resting. You cut over to Space Sasha, and she's prattling on about how they've cross-referenced the Red Angel against all these known species in the database, while Abe Sapien over there is drinking something, and the sneezy alien from the premiere tries to alien-splain to Burnham about the limits of Starfleet's knowledge. There's some discussion about whether the Angel might be one of a kind or a mutation, And then Saru proceeds to salt himself and explains that he woke up with a cold. Well, Pike shows up and sends him to go rest, then talks to Burnham. And Pike acts quite fatherly about relaying what number 1 brought him, which is the warp trail of the shuttle that Spock stole from Starbase 5, and he's already put them on an intercept course. Then Sasha insists she can't see Spock when they catch up to him, and this is really starting to make me wonder what she did to him. I mean, stick his head in an automatic rice picker? I don't know. Either way, they get pulled out of warp while arguing the point and go to red alert, because some kind of huge mass has them trapped in a stasis field like a fly in a web. Dun dun dun. So after the titles, you got Sasha going on about the sheer mass of this thing and that it contains both living and non-living matter. Sneezy brings up its age, being around 100,000 years. Burnham plays an extrapolation of the sphere vibrating, and it annoys all 3 of them. When Pike says to figure out how to free the ship, Sasha apparently responds in Klingon, and then Pike shoots back in French, I think. So what I heard before watching this was that the Universal Translator goes bonkers and has them talking in random languages to each other. I remember DS9 did an episode like this, too, but it was a bit more sensical in that the speech patterns of the station crew were scrambled, like, within their own brains. Here I have to wonder, why the hell don't they just turn the translator off? So, Sasha calls for Saru since he knows a bunch of languages, called back to an earlier episode when he told Tilly he learned 94 of them. And Pike cracks a joke about the Tower of Babel, and apparently the translator has been invaded by a virus. To which I say again, turn it off. Saru turns on the backup translator instead, then goes with Sasha to try and purge the virus. Yeah, in the meantime, turn the damn translation system off, maybe? Apparently English or some variation of it is considered Federation standard, so it would really be... would it really be that serious to turn the system off in the meantime? Down in engineering, Tilly reports that they seem to be unaffected. And then Reno, that curmudgeonly engineer/amateur doctor from the asteroid in the premiere episode, shows up and does her best McCoy impression. Now, I facepalmed multiple times during this scene because Stamets and Reno bitch at each other, and I had to side with Reno. Why? Because Stamets got all huffy when she pointed out that warp core technology is dependable and such. And of course, he had to start whining about how dilithium mining and the wars fought over it have been so terrible, and he tries to compare that to the Earth nearly choking to death on pollution 2 centuries earlier. Yeah, I'm breathing fine. So are most things and people in the world. This hyperbole was really out of place, and poor Tilly got caught in the middle. He gives a little diatribe about solar panels and how awesome they were, and again compares them to his magic mushrooms. Boy. So, Stamets and Reno trade some zingers. Tilly wonders if the big ball outside might have to do with May the Blob, and Reno zings Stamets again. So then we have Saru and Sasha working on the translator problem. They speak Russian in this part. Uh-oh. Starfleet collusion. Saru damn near collapses after they get the problem fixed, and Burnham demands to know what's really going on with him. Then, after a bunch of electrical sparking in the spore bay, Reno informs them that they have a lot of current still built up. So she, Tilly, and Stamets come up with a plan to diffuse all that pesky electricity. Sasha learns that the virus is spreading and damaging more of the ship. This really feels like Contagion, where the Enterprise D almost got destroyed by an alien program in the computers. Anyway, she takes Saru to sickbay. Back with the spores, Reno is going to just plug the gas transfer tube thing between the built-up current and the ship's frame. Oh boy, I hope no one's leaning against a bulkhead in the outer sections. Youch. They all get zapped, especially Reno, and Tilly gets the comical poofed hair. May the Blob gets loose and grabs onto Tilly again, so she panics. After that, Pike runs into Sasha and Saru and learns he's worse off than they thought. Sickbay is busy, but they learn Saru's in a lot of pain and is also reluctant to explain what's wrong at first. He tells him his condition is terminal. He posits that the sphere has somehow kicked off this biological process that begins when his kind are about to die and be culled by the predators on their world, which is another callback, but this time to one of those crappy short treks, which I hear are on Netflix now. Anyway, Burnham refuses to accept the finality of all this. After that, we see that Stamets quarantined Tilly with the blob on her arm. So she starts going on about May's intentions and Stamets figures out she's being given psilocybin by the Blob, and so is basically on shrooms, or a bad trip, as Reno puts it. Didn't they defuse the electrical charge? I mean, shouldn't they be able to get someone from medical in here? So Saru figures out that they can create some digital antibodies to fight off the virus, so that they can break free. And it's also mentioned that the virus is destabilizing all systems, including the warp core. Yeah, this feels a lot like Contagion. And they figured out they just had to shut down and wipe the computer, then reinstall from clean backups. There was a Stargate Atlantis episode like that too, involving the Daedalus and the Wraith computer virus. But I digress. So on Death's Door, Saru helps Sasha work on a solution. She acts hurt about Abe Sapien over here not telling her about this aspect of his nature. He asks her to catalog his personal logs and all that, when he dies, and reminisces about him leaving his world and joining Starfleet. Now, I realize this was supposed to be an emotional, sad scene, but it came off as stilted and forced, as these scenes usually do, just like the ones between Amanda and Burnham. So back on the bridge, Awoshik-kun, hey, I got it, tells Pike that if they are stuck much longer, they'll lose track of Spock because at maximum warp. Little nitpick here, shuttles are notoriously slow compared to starships, especially in this era. I'm just putting that out there. Anyway, the ship is in a mess and unable to jump away or do much of anything at the moment. So Sasha gets to engineering and sees what's going on with Tilly. Apparently the doors are still sealed too, even though they diffused all that current earlier. Stamets comes up with a way to talk to the Blob, and Sasha reiterates the same theory back to Saru with regard to communicating with the sphere. This is just weird and all over the place. I mean, this was hypothesized earlier and then just abandoned. And now they act as if it's some shattering realization. So Saru theorizes the sphere is dying and that, somehow this brought out a sympathetic reaction in him. Then Reno decides to drill a hole in Tilly's head to improve the signal from Stamets' doohickey so they can talk to May. I'm not kidding. Saru interrupts Pike when he's about to full-town torpedo the sphere and swears up and down that the thing is dying and they just need to power down and let it take over so that it can transmit whatever it needs to transmit before it dies, so it can be remembered. Now, Pike, of course, protests, but they show him that the sphere's UV signature, when they run it through the translator, reveals all this highly advanced information, languages, whatnot. And while all that's going on, Stamets and Reno, they disassemble and jerry-rig some stuff for a cortical implant. Then Tilly and Stamets do a brief duet before he gives her the Egon treatment and plugs the implant in so they can talk to May. Now, apparently all that jumping through the mycelial network last season, and that one time this season, disturbed the Blob's kind, so apparently all his posturing about spore drive being more ecologically friendly than warp was BS. Anyway, he tries to offer to try and fix all of this in exchange for Tilly being released, but May says no and starts engulfing Tilly, starting with her head. Ugh. Anyway, Pike is convinced to let the shields down, try to receive the sphere's last transmission, and then run like hell to catch Spock. They receive the download and then almost get destroyed when the sphere blows, though its last act is to reverse polarity on the stasis field and push Discovery clear. Stamets frees Tilly, or he thinks he does, from the Blob, as if she was in a cocoon. Abe Sapien thinks he's going to die, so Sasha helps him to his quarters. Now, there's this kind of sappy scene between Burnham and Saru in his quarters while he's ruminating about what sort of life he made for himself in Starfleet. I do gotta admit, the tears that she cries here, they seem heartfelt when she goes to cut off his ganglia and end his suffering. Before that, he makes her promise to mend her relationship with Spock, but then the ganglia just fall off. So then in sickbay, he's back to normal and free and feels free of fear for the first time in his life. Sasha tells him that the sphere gave them everything it saw and experienced over its long lifespan, and Saru postulates what it might mean that he defied his species' defining characteristic of basically a limited lifespan, and what that might mean for his race, how it's at odds with his promise to not return home or interfere with the destiny of his species. It's probably a setup for a B plot or another episode which doesn't advance the Red Light story arc. Oh joy. So, the sphere also apparently gave them the location of Spock, so they warp out that way. Sasha also decides to make good on her deathbed promise to Saru, even if he technically welched out by not dying. Then down in engineering, Stamets is closing the door to the mycelial network, as he puts it, while Tilly resumes seeing and hearing May's goofy self. The blob doses them all, and there's this stupid druggy scene between Reno and Stamets before they realize that Tilly got nabbed again, or maybe they never freed her in the first place. And there you go. So the preview looked rather silly. It involved a bunch more shrooming and over-the-top efforts at suspense. And, I do get what the tie-in between the title and events of this episode were, what that was. The toll being paid before death and all that. As far as that goes, not bad. I still say this and other episodes would do so much better as part of a show that's not connected to this franchise. But I mean, when your main draw is on nostalgia and otherwise riding the coattails of a long and storied intellectual property, I guess it's a safer bet to do that instead of trying to make an original series. So I figured I'd start with a ranking system here. I give this episode 3 out of 5 mushrooms. That's pretty much a completely arbitrary system, like I imagine most of the decisions in the STD writing room are. Anyway, like, share, and subscribe. Give me your thoughts, any that you might have. And until next time, Diaz out.